My name is Ted Ladd, and before we get going, I know in some places it's considered impolite to call a faculty member by his first name, but I'm American, so please call me Ted whenever you meet me in person or in this particular webinar. And I'm a professor of entrepreneurship. I'm also the Dean of Research at Hult, and I head up our faculty recruiting. And I teach, luckily, at 5 of the 6 Hult campuses. I'm based in San Francisco, but I also teach in Boston, Shanghai, and Dubai. I don't teach in the New York Hult office only because New York and I do not get along very well. So I try and steer clear of that. I also have worked in other places around the world. I teach at Harvard University, also in Cambridge. I've worked for 3 different major tech companies throughout my life. No, maybe 10, but these are the only 3 that have logos that you might recognize. Palm, that created the Palm Pilot. I started a business that was some energy software that was recently purchased by UL, Underwriters Laboratory. And then I was part of a small startup, and we created a smartwatch that evolved into and was acquired by wearOS. So it's now a part of Google. I present often and I publish often for my academic work. So the Academy of Management is that logo in the middle left. I also publish in the Harvard Business Review, Stanford Social Innovation Review, and I'm a regular contributor to Forbes. And then I have probably too many degrees: undergrad at Cornell, an MBA from Wharton, a master's in international economics from Johns Hopkins, and my PhD from Case Western, focused exactly on what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully your conclusion from that litany is that I'm credible, and that what I'm going to say in the next couple of minutes does indeed have logic, experience, and rigor behind it. So where we need to start when thinking about reinvention is, why have we typically reinvented? Usually it's from shifting competition. That's the core of most MBA strategy courses, is the need for doing something different in this game back and forth with your competitors in order to reach and retain customers. And that's the most frequent reason to reinvent. The second is new technologies. And I don't mean new technologies that only your competitor has and you don't, because that would, I think, go into shifting competition. These new technologies are in this category relate to services that can cross all competitors within a particular sector. So for me, for example, artificial intelligence is a new technology that is available to everybody that will require that lots and lots of different businesses figure out how to reinvent themselves and their own services, in part because some of what they had offered no longer needs to be done, and in part because consumers are going to expect more. The third, and typically least frequent reason for reinvention, is an unexpected shift in customer demand. Customers don't actually change that often, even when you have something like artificial intelligence hit the market. Do most customers in your country know if they're experiencing a bot that has artificial intelligence? Probably not. Could they explain artificial intelligence? Probably not. So customer demand doesn't change that often, except in the last 2 months. It has shifted faster than ever before. And I want to talk a little bit about how it shifted, because that will set up perhaps more specific actions that we should consider as we reinvent. So what is this new economy going to look like? First of all, I'm moving beyond the current health crisis. So that needs to be addressed. I'm looking a year ahead. What will this new economy look like? And there's good news and there's bad news. The good news: this is the great leap online. Billions of people who have already had access to the internet but were using it lightly, all of a sudden are conducting most of their daily activities online, including you. You are more familiar and comfortable with the screen. You're using lots more apps on the screen. You're figured out how to shift your brain so you can learn online and you can teach online. You can have parties online. You can have family reunions online. We were already ordering online anyway, but Amazon has increased its sales by an enormous amount. So this great leap online is a dramatic shift that accelerated what had been a slow move of activities to all of a sudden a flood. The second good news is that we've redefined basic needs. And the reason that this is good news is because now we have a better handle on what people care about in their core. I'm not sure that, so for example, we initially cared about toilet paper. That's been alleviated. Now we care about social connection. That I think will remain. There's some aspects of our consumption, I think, that may never come back. Things that we have realized we just don't need anymore. They weren't important to us before, but they were perhaps habit or tradition, and we've dispensed with a lot of that. Understanding that, or at least anticipating that some things that have always occurred will no longer always occur, that gives you more power as you can contemplate the reinvention of your company. But there are obviously some challenges in this new economy. And again, I'm looking a year out from right now. We're still going to have constrained income and underconfidence. Some of this is going to be related to perhaps new waves of health crisis, but confidence, especially consumer confidence, is in a self-prophesizing mode. Because people don't have any money, they will worry that for the next year they won't have any money, which means that they won't go spend, which means that companies won't buy, which means companies will not increase employment, which means companies won't pay higher wages, which means that people won't have any money. So this is a self-fulfilling macroeconomic prophecy. And I think that will continue for a while. Our supply chains have also been disrupted. Now, some of this was entirely expected. There are parts of the world that were not open to imports or exports, whether it was for purchasing or for adding one extra piece of value to a unit and then transshipping it for finishing somewhere else. But this uncertainty of supply chains has been exacerbated by national politics. And this is true for many different nations around the world that are, whether it's based on fear or logic, are using this particular crisis to attempt to close their own borders to bolster their home industries and therefore reduce global trade. That might continue, which is unfortunately inefficient for almost everybody in the world. As a result, we're going to see some consolidation. Some businesses will not be able to survive, but they have a good idea. They just don't have enough money to keep going, which means those with cash right now are going to go on a buying spree. We've already seen it in the last couple of weeks from some large tech companies that are making acquisitions of interesting new technologies for cheap. This consolidation will continue, especially around platforms. Amazon, instead of hiring 40,000 people, hired 100,000 people. Airbnb, despite lousy earnings, raised a lot more money in anticipation of its initial public offering. So it's laying people off right now, cutting costs right now, but its acquisitions for interesting technologies could become, could help it accelerate faster into the new economy than its traditional competitors, the hotel chains. But I also want to make sure that as you're contemplating reinvention, anything I'm saying right now, which is my opinion, is hopefully common logic. I like to think so, but we are also immersed in herd opinions. And they change very quickly. And this is unfortunately giving rise to lots of perhaps unadvisable business ideas. So partly what I want to do today is help you not only determine how to change your business, but to do it with calm logic. And here are the steps that I'm going to go through: deconstruction, imagination, hypothesization, interviewing, and then prototyping. And I want to explain each one of these steps along the way. Let's start with deconstruction. So you're looking at a particular business, either your own or somebody else's, the first step is to make sure you truly understand the business. And I don't just mean understanding it by asking the founders some of the intricacies of the business. There are ways for us to use tools to deconstruct a business into its constituent elements, into its business model. One of the most popular tools was created by two gentlemen from the University of Lausanne, Alexander Osterwalder and Yves Pigneur, in 2010, and it's called the Business Model Canvas. It emanated from 10 years of academic research from management scholars. So the 9 elements within the Business Model Canvas aren't Osterwalder and Pigneur's 9 elements. Those are from all of us who do research in management. And this was the consensus. The genius of the Business Model Canvas is it puts it all on one page, and you can start to see some of the ways that different elements ripple across other elements. Let me explain just a few of these. You start right in the middle, the royal blue, you see value propositions. That is the element that contains the way that the company will solve a customer problem. And there could be many value propositions. It could be solve many problems, and there could be many attributes that the customers particularly like in how this company solves problems. Who is it solving problems for? Jump over to the far right to customer segments. Those are the people for whom the company is solving problems. And we can get pretty specific here about who's having their problems addressed. We can look at geography, where are they? Demography, age, income, outwardly observable characteristics, and psychography. What are they thinking? Can we group those into categories, into segments? Now, I did some research a couple of years ago to look at the elements of the Business Model Canvas that are the most important for founding entrepreneurs. If you're just starting a business, what should you care about most? And my conclusion was that you should start with thinking about value proposition and then customer segment. You should address the channels. How is the company going to deliver value to the customer, like physically get it to them? And then fourth, what's your revenue model? Are you going to charge by the hour? Are you going to charge per project? Are you going to charge a subscription up front? Are you not going to charge them at all and instead look for subsidies from someone else? So these are the 4 key elements that founders should focus on out of the 9. Let's take this to an example, this deconstruction to an example. And the example here is computer monitors. The reason I know that this is a good example is because every single one of you right now listening to this podcast has a computer monitor. It's a guarantee. And if you don't have a computer monitor and somehow you're listening to me through psychic connections, please in the chat tell us the secret for how to do that, because I really want to know. So I'm going to have you guys do a poll. I'm going to have you do an exercise. So get a computer handy. I'll tell you what I want you to do. I want you to take a computer monitor right now. Could be yours, could be another computer monitor, and give me a specific description of how it's valuable and to whom. I don't need you just to be talking about yourself as a student, because in fact, I'm going to start with, as a professor, the value to me is being able to reach you online. The way I want you to enter these particular ideas is to go to pollev.com/TedLad. We've just put that link inside of the chat box. Click on it. It is entirely anonymous. We cannot see who you are. You're welcome to put in multiple answers. And if you're sitting on this podcast and you're hoping that what you're trying to do is get an experience of what a Hult classroom is like, I will also discourage silence. Knowledge cannot be gained passively. You have to act. So I'm asking you, at least in a small way right now, to act. I've put the poll up. Here's my own initial response, that the existing value for customers is to interact with students. So the screen gives unlimited resources in a click. To whom? Don't forget that when I asked about this, I want value proposition and customer segment. My mother, at the age of 84, also uses a computer monitor. She does not know that there are unlimited resources at a click. Highly valuable is a subjective statement. What problems does this solve and for whom? Customers as common people, I'm not sure I've ever met a customer that would describe themselves as common. All right, we have displaying ads. That starts to get us to what the screen monitor is doing and the business model behind it, okay? Communications with friends, family, important business contacts. So it's the friends piece there. You can be a friend, and the purpose of the computer monitor is to connect you with other friends. We've defined the segment, we've defined the value proposition. We can even declare there that there's a problem that we're trying to solve, which is right now in this current circumstance, you're not allowed to see these friends face to face. So we have, oh, that's interesting. Hold on, let me stick there. Provides data visualization. Let me stop the loop here so I can see these individually. Provides visualization for data in different ways for data scientists and financial advisors. That's incredibly helpful. That is a very precise description of who is using the monitor and what they're using it for. That is the first step for deconstruction. Seeing the world for people who like to travel, but who right now cannot. I think we understand, you got it. I think you understand at least this piece of deconstruction. So I'm gonna move on. So in step one, you deconstructed your business, any business, into these particular 9 boxes, or maybe you just started with focusing on the big 4. The next step is to consider for each separate element of your business model, what else could you do? What are the options there? And you should do this in different passes. For the first pass, consider all ideas. There's nothing too crazy. So when somebody around the table, and this, by the way, this is an ideal team event. So even if you're a lone entrepreneur and you haven't yet come to Hult and therefore might not have a team of like-minded students around you, reach out to some friends and ask them to help you with this particular piece. So great team exercise. And in the first pass, there's no such thing as a stupid idea. Now, we all know that some ideas are really stupid. In the first pass, let it go. Just put everything up on the whiteboard. And the best way to do this, by the way, is to take little sticky notes and put them onto a poster-sized print of the business model canvas. So all ideas, whatever happens, do this a couple of times with a couple of days in between. This type of imagination exercise requires some time to fester in your brain as you mull different ideas. For the second pass, you can prioritize for risk, and I'll give you a couple of tools in a second to help you figure out what that prioritization might look like. You still don't have a lot of data, so you don't want to kick too many things out, and you're still not saying, wow, that's a really stupid idea. You're just saying, is that a risky idea? Can we build it, and is it likely to attract customers? This exercise isn't something that you should do once, conclude, and then throw away. I've worked for several startups where we have left our business model canvas up in a private conference room that the public cannot get access to for months, because we'll come in and first of all, we'll say, I had a new idea last night. Have we thought about that idea? And if it's already on the board, or if it's already in what I call the parking lot, it's been moved off to the side with a little note saying, here's why we decided not to pursue this idea. That's capturing institutional memory in a whiteboard. But this is also exactly what every member of the company should be focused on. How do we understand what we do now, and how could we make tweaks to it to make it better? So you should be revisiting this particular canvas for years. This should be a monthly activity. Here are some prompts to get you to think about how to ask questions in this imagination. For value propositions, your company currently makes something. What other problems can that product or service solve? And you might as well consider competition in here. What substitutes already solve some of these problems? If we're looking at a computer monitor, what substitutes already solve this? Books do it pretty well, especially ebooks. So there are lots of different things out there that solve this problem. For customer segments, what other problems do our current customers face? That's a great place to start. You already have a relationship with them. Is there something that you could do that would improve your value to people who already know you? Or are there problems that you could solve for people who are outside of your existing customer base? Maybe it's the same problem you're solving for one group of people. Could you just solve it for another group of people? For the channel, how other ways that you could reach them? This is especially important right now. If your business model was conceived more than two months ago, chances are it relies heavily on types of media and channels of communication that have declined rapidly, and it may not place sufficient weight on some of the businesses that have dramatically increased in size. So let's do this one. Let me go back to the example of computer monitors, and let me start off with my own possible example. I don't have any children, which is probably good for them. But I see my friends with small kids who are right now, both parents are trying to work from home, and they're trying to figure out what you do with a baby at home while you're quarantined and there's no possibility for school or daycare. So here's my idea. Take a computer screen and ruggedize it. So you can throw milk on it, you can touch it, you can kick on it, you can lay on it, and put this right into the baby's playpen. So it's sitting right there next to them, and they can watch this and be entertained. Hopefully you can broadcast something that is conducive to their brain development, but since I'm not a parent, not my problem. So that's my idea, a ruggedized video player that goes straight in the playpen, especially during this era of two-parent working at home, would be a substitute for childcare. I would like you now to do this same exercise. I'm going to put a poll up. What new values and new segments could you consider for a computer monitor that will matter in the new economy? The poll is up right now. Please take a few seconds. It's the same link, pollev.com/TedLad, same link that's in the chat. What do you think? While you're thinking and writing this down, let me give you a side paragraph, not on reinventing business, but on teaching at Hult. My expectation, and some of my former students who are in the room right now can hopefully confirm this, my expectation when I go into a class is that I am talking for less than half the time. The other half of class, either you're talking to all of us, or you're in teams talking with each other, or you're in pairs talking with each other. You don't learn by listening, you learn by acting, which is why my classroom at Hult is set up to provide as many opportunities as possible for you to act. All right, let's get to the poll and see some of the value propositions that you've come up with and for whom. So we have this possibility that universities could actually they could have their computer monitors to lend to students if they need it. I think somebody else is taking my toddler's idea to get them to learn shapes. Awesome. Hobby classes online, so the computer monitor could be a different way to generate money. Let me see. Okay, hold on. Let's go to that one. A computer-enabled monitor for teaching one-to-one cooking. This monitor could even have somehow a weight built into it, a scale built into it. So if the chef says, hey, listen, weigh that salt, it would put the thing on the scale and that amount would show up on the monitor. That'd be an interesting collision of simple scale and simple monitor. A monitor that could print directly to the screen, so you don't need a printer. I think printers are going to take a big hit in this particular crisis. Hopefully this will be the death knell of printers. I don't know why we need them anymore. Nobody in the world is using paper right now, so let's stick with that trend. I think you're starting to understand this. You're already starting to understand that you can deconstruct and then imagine new uses and new segments. And what you've done in this poll already is to take some new value propositions for existing customers who use monitors and some ways that people are already using monitors and extending them to groups that do not. That's exactly what this step is for. Let me keep going to the third step here. Underneath all of these different ideas that we just imagined are assumptions. So the third step you can do at home with your team is to convert these assumptions into hypotheses. You know what a hypothesis is from second grade. When you had two plants and you put one plant near the window and you put one plant in a closet, and the hypothesis was the one by the window will grow faster than the one in the closet. That's a hypothesis. It's a falsifiable proposition that is ready for evidence. And it's specific with details and metrics. Let me give you an example here. And this is unfortunately an example I see often from people who come to ask me for help in reinventing a business. They say, hey, listen, our assumption is if we build it, they will come. Folks are going to love our stuff. And that's their assumption. Folks are going to love our stuff. And they stop there. And I say, how do you turn that into a hypothesis? And they say, we don't know. Here are some suggestions. What if our hypothesis for the problem that we're trying to solve, and I'm going back to my example of the computer monitor and the baby pen, states that 15% of parents from a certain age range, making a certain amount of money in a certain geography, declare unprompted that providing childcare is one of their top 10 concerns. So if I went to ask them, how is working at home? This hypothesis is saying 15% of them would say, dealing with the kid is some of our top 10. I'm putting numbers to it. It is now easy, if I go out and talk to people, which is going to be the next step, if I go out and talk to people, to determine whether I was right or wrong in asserting the importance of this particular problem. And then a second assumption here can relate to the solution. 5% of these parents would consider my screen in the crib over some other possible substitutes for what you do with the kid: walks, naps, and a nanny. That I just converted folks will love our stuff into two feasible, usable, falsifiable propositions. So what do we do next? We go out and talk to people in order to test those. Now, this is a very simple idea and very hard to do, not because it's difficult, but because it requires that we do something we're uncomfortable with. You have to talk to strangers. I know earlier as people were talking about where they're from, there were a few people who are from the Philippines. And I had been doing some teaching in Manila and found that people in the Philippines are, they were not good candidates when I would go out, get out of the building and go do interviews with potential customers. Because, at least in my experience, people from the Philippines are incredibly nice, unbelievably nice, polite, diplomatic, they smile. But when I ask them a question, they tell me what they think I want to hear, not actually their own belief. So in order to do that, I had to get out of the building even more. I had to interview more and more and more people to make sure that I was getting objective data. What a nice reputation for a company, for a country to have. So friendly that it's tough to get objective data. I love that. So this interviewing should also occur in two different passes. The first one is you're going to explore the problem. Just as I had a hypothesis that parents would say childcare is a problem, I'm going to go out and test that hypothesis with some interviews that focus just on the problem. I'm not going to do a survey. I'm not going to do a focus group. I'm not going to spend any money. I'm going to find 100 different couples, and especially on Zoom, because we're now in the Great Leap Online, I'm going to spend 20 minutes saying, what problems do you have from working at home? And I'm just going to listen. If it turns out that childcare comes up, I know I'm onto something. The second pass is where we start to ask for solutions. This is where I might, in a different conversation, go back to those 100 people and say, great, you told me childcare was an issue. Which would you rather have? Nanny or napping? Which would you rather have? Napping or a computer monitor? I'm going to do various combinations of goods in order to determine how the computer monitor ranks there. And this is also where I can introduce the features of the monitor and the price of the monitor in order to determine whether my solution is feasible. You'll note here, I still haven't built anything. This is not a technology problem. This is a demand problem. So I'm solving for the demand problem. And you should do this repeatedly until you've gone through all of your friends. In other words, you've moved through people who want you to please them, and the answers have started to stabilize. What I have found is typically about 30 of these interviews. For the first couple of interviews, you're going to be the problem. You're going to get in the way. You're going to interrupt them. But what if? So you're going to settle down in the first few interviews. But thereafter, after 30 interviews, you start to see the same answers over and over again without that many surprises. That might suggest that you've gone far enough to start step 5. And step 5 is to create a prototype. What do I mean by this? This is the cheapest product or service that satisfies one value proposition. This is also called a minimum viable product. And you're going to sell this. This isn't a giveaway. You're going to sell this. This is an experiment inside of your reinvention to make sure you're on the right path. Let me give you a couple of, so there are some additional reasons and ways to do this. When you have a minimum viable product, you ought to expand the hypotheses that you already created to include some metrics on the prototype. So you can determine, for example, if I'm going to launch it to these 30 people, here are the number of people that will buy at this particular price. Great metric, great hypothesis. Falsifiable. Turns out I don't hit that number. I have to declare that my hypothesis was wrong. You should then launch this, offer this minimum viable product to exactly the people that you interviewed who said that they had a problem. Let's go through this process again from their perspective. They declared they had a problem. They declared that your solution was going to solve their problem, and then you offered them the solution that they said was going to solve their problem. Those are absolutely your first customers. If it turns out that when you do the prototype, the answer is nope, didn't work, you haven't spent much money, you should go back and start this again. Go back to you've already deconstructed, go back to the imagination step 2, and start thinking about new options that you could consider, turn those into hypotheses, and then do new interviews. This may sound tedious. It is much faster and less expensive than actually starting a company, building something, launching it, and finding that there's no customer demand. So how would you test this? What could be the MVP for computer monitors? We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to give you some of my ideas for this. For a kid if what I want to test is whether the kid will look at the monitor, I could use cardboard. That cost me 3 cents and some markers. If my hypothesis is that I want this kid to be able to see whether the moving images will matter to them, I don't need to make this. I can go buy an existing computer monitor at the cheapest one I can find and ruggedize it with duct tape around the edges and saran wrap around the back to make it waterproof, and so the baby, he or she, can touch it all they want. Doesn't cost me a lot of money. I haven't spun up a computer monitoring manufacturing line. I could go to a daycare facility and look at what they do, and then bring some existing computer monitors in and put them on the floor and say, did they break them? Do I actually even need to ruggedize this stuff? Can they handle it? And maybe there are also ways that I could Dewey just said I could get a small iPad and a waterproof case. Absolutely. Like, there are ways to use existing products to test, to put together in ways that perhaps aren't as elegant as I eventually would like, but to test individual value propositions. I might even put a webcam in the TV that so parents to watch their kids. That would be an extra feature, and I would go back and use that as a hypothesis, get out of the building to go ask people about it, and then envision a minimum viable product. So that is a way to go through all of these 5 steps. Now you may be saying at this point, okay, that sounds fine. Does this actually work? I've done some research on this particular process, and let me give you some of those results as we race towards the finish. I was looking at several hundred teams in a business pitch competition. So they were competing against each other. They started just with a problem and they had to come up with their own business model. And then they presented to judges. And and then I asked them afterwards, how did you create your business model? Did you use evidence? Did you just dream of something in the middle of the night? It turns out that the teams that actually collected evidence and used that to inform the construction of the business model did about 2.5 times better than teams who sat in the room and said, wouldn't it be cool if, and created a business model. So 2.5 times is a significant increase in success. But even more specifically, the teams that created hypotheses and went out and tested them and determined that the hypothesis was accurate, it was real. They got out of the building, they talked to people, and sure enough, that particular hypothesis was confirmed. They did better than 3% better for each hypothesis. So they kept, the more hypotheses, the more likely they did better. But here was, to me, the most interesting part of this particular research. Teams that had a hypothesis, they interviewed people, they did a minimum viable product, and they determined that the hypothesis was wrong, did even better for each wrong hypothesis. And you might be saying, wait a minute, they have just concluded that what they thought was right was wrong. And what are they building the business model on? Doesn't this mean that the business model now has evidence that it's the wrong business model? No, because they pivoted. This is a demonstration that they were listening objectively to evidence and then going back to the beginning and creating new hypotheses and retesting in order to arrive at a business model that was objectively going to be more successful. This is called evidence-based entrepreneurship. And what we're trying to do intentionally is to overrule epiphany and intuition. Those are not appropriate when you're trying to figure out customer demand that exists outside of yourself. Epiphany and intuition are not useful. Evidence is useful. And we did this, to remind you, in 5 different steps: deconstruction, imagination, hypotheses, interviewing, and prototyping. That's where I'd like to end it right now with a quote. And this is a quote that wasn't actually used for business. It was actually used for politics, but I think it applies here. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good managers to do nothing. Reinvention is necessary, and it has never been more necessary than right now, because our new economy will not resemble the old economy. So everybody is going to need to reinvent. Having a way, a scientific method to conduct that reinvention will increase the likelihood that when you emerge into the new economy, your business will be more successful than those people who did not follow a process and who did not collect evidence. To Dewey's point, this is exactly the scientific method. This is exactly what you learned when you were taking 2 trees and putting two potted plants and putting one in the window and one in the closet. It took a very long time, and it's still a fight to get the scientific method into business model design, because too many of us used to say, I just need experience and then I can design something. Or I had a cool idea last night and I know it's going to work. Those statements are problematic and typically do not lead to successful ventures. What does? Let's take the same scientific method that Galileo used and apply it to this domain of venture creation, and we will have greater success. Thank you for allowing me to talk about this. In case you can't tell, I love this stuff.